lordy, where do I even begin with this movie? Well, I guess I'll start by laying out my own terms here. Hi, what's up? I'm Channel Pup, the mascot for the Level-Headed Fanboy, and I'm not doing spoiler-free reviews anymore. If you haven't seen the movie yet, what are you doing listening to some random idiot talking about it online for? Go see it! If you want an endorsement, fine. Here's an endorsement. But if you haven't seen it yet, come back when you have.
Hey, wait a minute, it's me, Bob, from Bob's Burgers. Why don't you sit down? A YouTube video is a lot like a burger. It takes a bit of effort to grill it and put it together. But the thing is, while you may pay me for a burger, you can watch these videos for free. So all I ask is that you subscribe to the channel. Maybe hit the like button as well, Gene. And if you do want to pay for the video like you would pay for a burger, the link to the Patreon is in the description below. Enjoy the rest of the video, Linda.
So Across the Spider-Verse is the sequel to Into the Spider-Verse, which released in 2018. Into the Spider-Verse was a masterpiece, a bold reworking of the Spider-Man origin story that took a chance on Miles Morales as the lead Spider-Man of the film, and it absolutely paid off. But saying just that feels like a disservice to what this movie actually achieves. The film was elevated to greater heights by its strong direction, cinematography, and music, but what really propelled it into the cultural touchstone status that it's known for today was its innovations in 3D animation, rejecting the more commonplace style of 3D animation most notably popularized by Pixar, instead taking unique shading styles to new heights, pairing them with 15 frames per second animation, better mimicking that of the hand-drawn illustrations that Spider-Man began as, and it absolutely paid off, as Into the Spider-Verse was one of the most visually distinctive animated films of its time, and its influence on the industry at large can be seen today in the upcoming Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, as well as Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, The Bad Guys, and many more. If you want more of my thoughts on Into the Spider-Verse, it's part of the Spider-Man Retrospective series, so I will leave a link to that playlist in the description below for you to check out at your leisure. Into the Spider-Verse achieved such a high standard of filmmaking and storytelling that despite a fairly modest box office performance, it won the Oscar for Best Animated Feature, and word of mouth would eventually spread about just how utterly fantastic this movie was. Obviously, with the after-credits stinger, they were setting up a sequel featuring Miguel O Hara's Spider-Man 2099, as played by Oscar Isaac, and lo and behold, Across the Spider-Verse Part 1 would be announced, later retitled to just Across the Spider-Verse, with the third film being dubbed Beyond the Spider-Verse, completing the trilogy. Now, I won't lie, a small part of me felt just a little uneasy about this. For one, this was a Sony Pictures venture, and Sony have a proven track record of knocking things out of the park only to lose the goodwill one installment later. Not just that, but Across the Spider-Verse would have a completely different writing team and new directors. But the trailers certainly look good, and hey, Lord and Miller were still the lead producers, Daniel Pemberton was still on the music, and the cast were all coming back, so the only real question is, can lightning strike twice? Now, because I've only seen this the once, the plot summary might be a little, spotty in places, but the film does at least sit fairly vividly in my head. But if I miss anything or get anything wrong, just bear with me. We begin with narration from Gwen Stacy, as played by Hailee Steinfeld once again. This narration being akin to the character introductions from Into the Spider-Verse, but this time it's much more somber, and rather than introducing herself, she instead talks about Miles Morales, her best friend, and the first friend she's made since the death of the Peter Parker of her world, which we actually get to see play out this time, and how this event strained her relationship with Captain Stacy as he blamed the death of Peter Parker onto Spider-Woman, who obviously that's Gwen Stacy. Since that point, she's really closed herself off, including closing herself off from her bandmates and quitting the band. Now, we only caught slight glimpses of Gwen's world in Into the Spider-Verse, but here we spend much more time in Gwen's dimension, and so it gets its very own art style, which consists generally of pastel colors on opposite ends of the color wheel, in a way that complements Gwen's suit. If her world looks like this, it stands to reason that said world influenced her costume in-universe. We also see what she's been getting up to since the events of Into the Spider-Verse, as she thwarts a new version of the Vulture from a dimension inspired by 1800s Italian artwork from robbing an art gallery. Miguel O Hara and Jessica Drew make their way into her dimension as the three Spider People work together to take down this version of the Vulture, who from the jump demonstrates that this film is even more ambitious than its predecessor in terms of its animation. I also love how when Gwen jumps in to rescue the helicopter, her timing is influenced by her drumming in the band. It's such a nice touch, and yeah, Gwen's movements are all very rhythmic. After defeating Vulture, Gwen is cornered by Captain Stacy and she unmasks. However, Captain Stacy doesn't switch to dad mode because of this revelation. He instead decides to remain in cop mode, going to arrest her. Miguel and Jessica trap him in a containment field, and Gwen follows the other two Spideys into a portal to the multiverse. Jessica Drew gives Gwen one of these wrist devices, meaning that she can open the portals and survive in other universes without glitching. We then revisit Miles' world in Brooklyn. A little recap of the events of the previous film bring us up to speed with where Miles, played by Shameik Moore, is now, and his parents Jefferson and Rio are attending a meeting with Miles' teacher, which Miles was also meant to attend, but he can't because he's chasing after the Spot, played by Jason Schwartzman, a man who can create portals, and the dynamic between these two is really great. The Spot is just endlessly entertaining to watch, as he's incredibly sassy and takes the connection between his and Miles' origins incredibly seriously, and he takes it personally when Miles doesn't take him or his assertions of his importance seriously. Particularly when Miles dips out of the fight to attend the meeting with his teacher and parents. So being Spider-Man is not only taking its toll on his school life, but also his relationship to his parents. But it's also made quite clear that Miles' parents are by no means perfect. See, they sent him to Vision's Academy to give him the best possible chance in life, so he could go on to do extraordinary things. Yet, Miles, unbeknownst to them, is Spider-Man. He's already doing extraordinary things that he's being chastised for because he's not attending school. Layering on top of that, there's Miles wanting to go out and work in Jersey to get the best possible college program, but his parents want him to stay strictly in Brooklyn, which would be antithetical to wanting him to go out and spread his wings and do extraordinary things. Hey, that rhymes. Now, the relationship between Miles and his parents really needed to be a believable parent-kid relationship to pull off the story they're trying to tell. And yeah, it is one of the more believable parent-kid relationships that I've seen in films. See, the media all too often approaches parents as these completely selfless, saintly figures who are always willing to sacrifice for their kids and are always willing to listen to their needs, with their intentions always being pure, and just like, nah man, that's not entirely it. There are elements of that, sure, but that's an underrepresentation. See, from what I've witnessed from friends' parents, and to some extent my own parents, is that parents can come off as incredibly arrogant and self-serving too. Now, that's not me slagging them off or anything. I want to approach this from a level of understanding. It's kind of to be expected from some extent, but sometimes parents, in the name of love, will push their kids away and then not understand why their parents are away, if you get me. For example, Miles' father, Jefferson, fears that he's going to lose Miles and that he's drifting away, but then grounds him for 2 months when he shows up late to his promotion celebration. Like, that's the kind of thing that's going to stack up and cause your kid to drift away. And I think it's really important that Across the Spider-Verse actually properly represents how loving parents can still be absolutely clueless, and that's just a facet of humanity. We as human beings are always skeptical of change. It's understandable that after 15 years of raising their son, they're afraid of their lives completely changing shape when Miles does flee the nest. A great deal of this film hinges on that parental relationship, and it was paramount for them to get that right. I don't just think they got it right, I think they aced it with flying colors. So Miles and Jefferson both have to dip out of the meeting as the Spot is still out there, and the Spot is chased down to the site of the Alchemax Super Collider from Into the Spider-Verse, and it's here where the Spot's origins are revealed. He was the scientist that brought Spider number 42 into this dimension as a test for the Super Collider. He is the guy that Miles threw a bagel at, and when the collider exploded, it turned him into a man made of portals, for lack of better description. So something I love here is that while the story doesn't feel overly reliant on Into the Spider-Verse, it still uses the events of that story as a foundation in that The villain of this film directly ties into the events of the previous one. So Spider-Man and Jefferson chat by the side of the Alchemax site, which is now covered in tarp. And the fact this movie took the time to make the tarp look nice as it shimmers and ripples is just... There's such an appreciation for the most basic things in these worlds from the filmmakers. What's also really nice here is that typically the Spider-Man we know, Peter Parker, doesn't have a dad or even a parental figure that operates in the same field he does. Heck, in the Spider-Man video game series, Jefferson Davis is killed off before Miles even becomes Spider-Man. But here in this film, because his dad is in the same line of work he is and is still alive, we really get to see Miles as Spider-Man interacting with his father, and it leads to such an interesting and enjoyable dynamic. See, Miles knows Jefferson is his dad, obviously, duh, goes without saying, but Jefferson doesn't know that Spider-Man is his son. So, when he has these little pep talks, Spider-Man is actually able to communicate Miles' perspective. But I also love that, because Miles is a younger Spider-Man, he's also a little flippant towards Jefferson as well. Him mumbling, maybe get off the kid's ass, was brilliant. I adore this dynamic here. We've never seen anything like this in a Spider-Man movie before, and I, for one, absolutely welcome it. So Jefferson is being promoted to captain of the police, and the Morales family are holding a celebration full of friends and family. And Miles is going to attend with a couple of cakes and a heartfelt message written on the cakes. So he goes to swing home with the cakes, but obviously, being Spider-Man, things don't go to plan. I think one of my favorite details here is when Spidey accidentally leaves the cakes in the taxi, and the taxi drives off, and we get this little comic book text bubble in the top left corner that says, "The cakes take a ride." That's genuinely so damn funny. Funnier yet, when the cakes arrive and he presents them to Jefferson, the cakes are all smeared and damaged with the letters now reading, "I am not proud," and it couldn't have read any worse than that. The humor in this film is great, with only one exception, but we'll get to that. We'll get there. So Jefferson grounds Miles, but a portal appears and Gwen Stacy pops out. The two go swinging together, and boy, I should rephrase that. Okay, so the two catch up over the skies of Brooklyn. That better? I adore how the Spider-Verse films approach conversational scenes. Into the Spider-Verse had Peter and Miles talking while pacing up and down the walls. This film has Miles and Gwen catching up over web swinging, and different stunts convey how far Miles has come in honing his Spidey abilities. Listen, I don't mean to be the guy that dunks on the MCU. You know I love the MCU films, but this kind of stuff in an MCU film would be done while the characters chat over coffee and a biscuit. I just think these Spider-Verse movies are a much higher pedigree of filmmaking than the MCU Spider-Man films. And I'm not putting the blame for any of that on anyone like, John Watts or whatever. I'm really just hoping that these Spider-Verse movies encourage live action films to raise the bar a little bit when it comes to conveyance of characters, because these flourishes are not exclusive to animation. These can be achieved in live action. The animation only elevates it. So Gwen reveals to Miles that she's now part of a spider society that exists in another dimension. Kingpin's Super Collider has destabilized the walls between multiverses, and the Spider Society are out to clear that up. Again, building on the foundations of previous movies, good move. But it turns out that Gwen isn't here for a reunion. She's keeping an eye out for the Spot, who's going on to become a larger threat as, with his portals, he's now able to explore the multiverse, which includes retro animations, a quick cameo from Mrs. Chen from the Venomverse, which makes this the best film she's ever appeared in, and it was Lego Spidey that informed Miguel of the Spot as a threat, leading to Gwen being sent here. As Gwen looks through the Spot's apartment, Miles, now invisible, hangs upside down behind her. And I love the little homage to the upside down kiss, but obviously she can't see Miles. I think that was deliberate. She heads back into the portal, and unbeknownst to her, Miles follows. This takes them both to Mumbattan, where they meet Pavitra Pakba, the Spider-Man of India. And it's impossible not to love this guy. He's the happiest, quirkiest Spidey of the bunch. He's just got such a healthy thing going on. Just endlessly optimistic. I love the gag also about the traffic in Mumbattan and chai tea. Pavitra's enthusiasm is just very infectious. So the three Spideys chase down the Spot to the Super Collider in Pavitra's world, where the Spot is using the Collider to create more power for himself and become a greater threat. It's here where we meet Hobie Brown, Spider-Punk, a punk musician, go figure, with a counterculture edge, detached from everything that's going on, but still building friendships with Gwen, Miles, and Pavita. Hobie is endlessly likable, hilarious, and his art style looking like punk-era newsprint just looks fantastic. Again, very ambitious with the animation here. He's also British, so I guess in some ways he's a mashup of Spidey UK and Spider-Punk, which makes sense given that Britain was the birthplace of punk. I don't know if he was always British in the comics though, I don't know a lot about Spider-Punk. I, at the time, kind of chalked it up to being a toilet brain gimmick, when in this movie here, he's honestly one of my favorite characters. So Spot gets away, now an eldritch abomination, the Collider becomes unstable, and Cataclysm hits Mumbattan. But Jessica Drew is warned of an incoming Canon event. Miles goes in to rescue a police captain on a bridge, but Gwen tries to stop him. Miles successfully rescues the police captain, but Mumbattan becomes unstable and begins glitching. So Miles is taken to the Spider Society, aka Spidey Variant Cameo Central, to meet the leader, Miguel O Hara. Among the cameos in the Spider Society are Donald Glover as a live-action Prowler who's been detained, possibly the MCU version, as well as PS5 Spidey in his Mark II advanced suit as seen in Spider-Man 2, voiced by Yuri Lowenthal, appearing exactly as he does in the games. So that raises the question, who's this guy? What's especially interesting here is that live-action characters are presented as live-action appearances here. We get cameos of reused footage from Amazing Spider-Man 1, where Andrew Garfield stands by Captain Stacy as he dies. So if Miles Morales were to appear in, say, a Spider-Man No Way Home adjacent project, would he still be animated, kind of like a Who Framed Roger Rabbit kind of deal? Kinda intrigued to see that. So Miguel explains to Miles that canon events are scenarios that must play out, predetermined events that hold dimensions together. The police captain that Miles rescued in Mumbattan was meant to die, and Miles' interference with that event destabilized Pavita's universe. And so Miguel has deduced that police captains that are close to Spider-Man are usually on the chopping block. These are, typically speaking, canon events, pillars that hold up that dimension. The movie never defines why these are canon events, and truthfully, I don't think Miguel knows exactly why these are canon events. The multiverse just works in mysterious ways, but boy is that ever an existential nightmare. That there are people who exist purely to die, whose deaths serve to hold up their respective dimension, and the fact that the Spideys of their own dimension cannot prevent those events, often stopped by their own ignorance. What does that say about free will in this multiverse? That being said, I think Across the Spider-Verse does a much better job with these ramifications than, say, the Loki TV series did, where Loki basically defined a multiverse with zero free will but refused to explicitly state it. Across the Spider-Verse goes out of its way to define that this consists of only specific events, and then doesn't elaborate much further than that. Leaves it a little bit more mysterious, and I think that's a much smarter way of doing it, even if still questionable. What Miguel proposes is an existential nightmare, and the problem is that his belief is fully justified, as he tried to enter a universe that lost its Miguel O Hara where his family were still alive, and it tore that dimension apart, and because of that he's got the weight of an entire universe that died on his shoulders, so it gives justification for what happens next. Miles deduces that his father was just promoted to police captain. Now, I figure that Miguel could save himself a headache by saying, "Oh, nah, it'll be fine." But instead, he's honest with Miles, revealing that Jefferson Davis's death is a canon event due to occur in 2 days at the hands of the Spot. Why did he reveal this? Well, Miles came to the conclusion that his father was on the chopping block himself, so even if Miguel were to dismiss it, chances are Miles would still be on high alert and would likely act differently due to this knowledge, affecting the canon event. Thus, the thing that keeps Miles from saving his father is Miguel keeping him contained. Now here's the thing, every Spider-Man here has lost someone, be it a father figure, a police captain, they're all down the road on that. But for Miles, it's all still to happen, so of course he's going to try to prevent it. He's going to do what he can to find that happy medium. And yeah, I can completely understand that. Everything, any stakes will always fall into question when there's a loved one on the line, no matter how imperfect they are or how unreasonable they can be. Now, we revisit Peter B. Parker in a much better place in life. He's had a child with MJ, who is Mayday Parker, but while he wants Miguel to treat Miles with more humanity and respect, he also kinda sides with Miguel, which would surely be the ultimate character assassination. See, Peter Parker is not the kind of person to stand by and tell someone to let their loved ones die. Whether that person he's telling is another Spider-Man or anyone else, he'll always find another way. We saw that in Spider-Man No Way Home, which is also referenced here. Spider-Man will never not try to save someone. But what makes this work is that it's shown that Miguel called upon Peter B for help when the universe his loved ones were in fell apart. Peter B saw that devastation for himself. It's a matter of sacrificing one person to save an entire dimension. Boy, did this ever become philosophical. But again, when it's a loved one on the line, utilitarianism goes out the window. The other Peters, including Josh Keaton as Spectacular Spider-Man, and boy is it ever good to see him again, go to console Miles, but he's determined to find another way. Hobie sides with Miles and decides to just dip, wanting nothing to do with any of this ugly business, giving Gwen his dimensional wristwatch. Unwilling to risk it, Miguel traps Miles in a containment field, but because Miles has the Venom Stinger attack thingy, he's able to escape and goes on the run in Miguel's world. And it's a terrific sequence as we see how different Spider people with different methods and different abilities rush to detain this other Spider person who's able to outsmart them all, including a brilliant cameo from the 1960s animated Spider-Man, whose frame rate is just too scuffed for him to even do anything. Miguel corners Miles onto a moving train in Nova York, which looks a lot like Terminal Velocity from Sonic Colors looking at it. He reveals the truth to Miles, that he's the original anomaly. The spider that bit him was never meant for him, and had he not been bitten, the Peter Parker of his world would have stopped the collider sooner, survived, and the multiverse would never have been destabilized. Because of Miles being bitten by a spider that was never meant for him, the multiverse is falling apart. The Peter Parker of his world is dead, and another dimension lost its Spider-Man. Now, Miguel comes off as particularly callous here, but the scary part is that everything he says completely adds up, and if you go back and re-watch Into the Spider-Verse, yeah, you can see that the spider that bit Miles was glitching. Lordy, did they really have this all planned out from the get-go? It's genuinely incredible how well all of this lines up with the events of the first film. And it would also explain why Miles has unique abilities such as the Venom Blast, which Miguel's tech doesn't account for. It's revealed to Miles that Peter and Gwen both knew about all of what was to come for Miles and had spoken with Miguel prior to all of this. They are in on Miguel's plan. Miles feels betrayed because of this. He asserts to Miguel that everyone keeps telling him how his story is supposed to go and that he's done with it. He's doing his own thing now. He Venom blasts Miguel and takes a leap of faith off of the train. And I love how the musical leitmotifs from Into the Spider-Verse's Leap of Faith scene return here. And bits of the train break around Miles' fingers, just like the glass from that scene too, signifying that he's afraid, but he's taking the leap. I mean, that's what a leap of faith is, right? Going invisible, Miles sends himself back to Spider Society HQ to send himself home. Gwen stands up to Miguel and he disqualifies her from the Spider Society, sending her home, not realizing that she has Hobie's wrist device. Miguel assembles a task force to find Miles Morales consisting of himself, Ben Reilly, and Jessica Drew. Now, Ben Reilly is an interesting one. Visually, he looks fantastic. His art style pays so much homage to the classic comic artwork, but in terms of his characterization, he's a very exaggerated version of the character for comedic effect. It's a very retroactive lens on that character. He's a broody loner, but to a comedic extent. He narrates everything he does, and I guess I can understand why Ben Reilly fans would feel a bit disappointed by that. The fact that if, say, this is your favorite Spider-Man, you got a caricature of that rather than the character from the books. But I don't really make much distinction between this and what was done with Spider-Man Noir in Into the Spider-Verse, where his broody demeanor was also played up for comedic effect. I was fine with it there, and I'm fine with it here. Ben Reilly may be a good character in of himself, but he does kind of represent a time in comic history that a lot of people are glad to be away from. Granted, I'd still take it over whatever is going in the Spider-Man comics currently. The whole secret clone idea, though, the incredibly on-the-nose, not even a metaphor at this point, idea of Spider-Man fighting himself, the revelation that Peter was the clone all along, it's stupid. And if you disagree, that's fine. That's your prerogative. Again, I can understand being disappointed at your favorite Spidey cinematic debut being a character, but I gotta say, I think there was a minuscule chance of them ever doing a faithful adaptation of this shredded crop top wearing embodiment of 80s, 90s comic book sensibility or lack thereof. It's one of those things where I won't deny that the character absolutely transcends what his purpose was and the stories that he was a part of, but I also don't feel that the way they treated him in this movie was by any stretch inappropriate. And I guess there's a bit of difference in that Spider-Man noir in the first film. While everything was played up to a comedic effect, he still kind of got, I guess, more intimate character moments, but I don't doubt that we'll be seeing some of that in the next film. For now, he's just a perfectly innocuous character as far as I'm concerned. I'm not a Ben Reilly fan, what can I say? So as far as I'm concerned, this doesn't really matter, but I get it if you are a Ben Reilly fan. So I don't know, suck it up, Buttercup, or don't, I guess. It's your prerogative. I'm not some kind of, influencer or anything like that, but I have seen Ben Reilly fans saying they refuse to see the movie now knowing this, and it's just like, the only one who's missing out here is you know? So when Gwen returns to her world, she confronts her father for the first time since the two parted ways at the start of the film. She gives him an opportunity to arrest her, but instead he reveals that he quit the police force because he looked inward, and in the time they've been apart, he chose to believe her and to accept her. Now, quick detour, we're going to talk about something that is considered to be a bit more political for a second, so I don't know, I guess I hope you can handle that. In Gwen's room, there's a poster with the trans flag that reads, "Protect Trans Kids." Now, one could easily point to this being a little innocuous background element. Heck, I typically don't like when these things are just stuck in the background for virtue signaling reasons, because that can easily be edited out for the Chinese government and it just comes across as a bit toothless. Either go hard or go home. But this time there is at least some parallel to what's going on here, and this feels like more of a highlight, I guess. See, Gwen's story relates to her father not accepting her for who she is. She's Spider-Woman, not because she chooses to be, but because that's just who she is, that's her identity, and it's put a strain on her relationship with her father. As her father looks inward and realizes that he's driving her away, he comes to accept that. He comes to accept her. Gwen's story is a story about identity acceptance, so there is at least a bit of parallel to this, an allegory that can be found, in the same way that Miles has a BLM badge on his bag and refuses to let his father die, because life matters. Jefferson's life matters. Even if the rest of the world, the rest of the multiverse is saying otherwise. Oh, hey, if you take issue with those causes, by the way, I'm not the guy to talk to about that. I'm just acknowledging them in a narrative context, so now really isn't the time to get all bent out of shape about it. But I know you will anyway, because that just happens. I've seen plenty of other comment sections to know better by now. So I'm absolutely making a bet with a few friends that there'll be a few comments that get upset about my acknowledgement of this, so go ahead, make me some money. Following on from that, Gwen goes to search for Miles, but doesn't find him back on his world. She vows to Rio and Jefferson that she'll find him and sets out into the multiverse. Miles quickly realizes he's in a multiverse where Spider-Man never existed. Jefferson Davis is dead, Aaron Davis is still alive, and Miles Morales is the Prowler, and he's confronted with none other than himself. He's been taken home, but to the home of the spider that bit him. Gwen assembles a team of Spideys to go and help Miles stand against Miguel, and this team includes Peter B. Parker, Spider-Man Noir, Penny Parker, Spider-Ham, Hobie Brown, and their other holographic Spider-Woman, and if I'm missing anyone else, I apologize. Again, I only have first viewing to work off of here. But boy was it good to see the legacy cast from Into the Spider-Verse back, even if they didn't get any dialogue here. It's going to be cathartic to see them all together again to help Miles in the next film. Daniel Pemberton goes absolutely balls to the walls on the music here, as the drums and electric guitar are firing off on every cylinder known to man, and the moment I've been dreading all movie happens. The screen cuts to black. To be continued. I've got goosebumps just talking about it. No mid or after credit scene to undercut the cliffhanger though. Just a gorgeously animated, painted outro for the film. So what's the verdict? What an astounding film. Into the Spider-Verse was all about redefining what it means to be Spider-Man and how there are so many different ways to stay true to the mantle. And Across the Spider-Verse takes that and blurs those lines even further. I think what Across the Spider-Verse succeeds at is what The Last Jedi set out to achieve, and well, I don't think my opinions on that film are really all that relevant, but I think Across the Spider-Verse does this much better. You take these hard-defined rules for these characters, their lore, and you challenge them, push them as far as they'll go, and you blur the lines. Miles Morales is rejecting the canon of being Spider-Man. He's rejecting the Spider-Man narrative. This film goes as far as to state that certain events in Spidey history are canon to all Spider-Men, and Miles rejects that. Yet he's doing it because he refuses to let someone die, which is an incredibly Spider-Man thing to do. Again, it falls in line with Spider-Man No Way Home, in which Peter reversed the fates of the various villains. Miguel is actively telling Miles that he has to let his father die, which seems like such a non-Spider-Man thing to do, but he's only doing this and being as hard-headed as he is, as cruel as he is, because he's taking responsibility for universes that aren't his own. Being Spider-Man is all about taking responsibility, and he feels responsible for what happened to the universe that he destroyed by inhabiting it. He won't let it happen again, but to do that requires him to be very un-Spider-Manly to Miles. Secrets having a cost is fundamental to Spider-Man as well, and Gwen's secrets cost her her friendship with Miles, but she takes responsibility, gathering her own team of spider people to help Miles. What's so interesting here is, in taking responsibility for the universe he destroyed, Miguel has to be the villain of Miles' Spider-Man story. Which means that Across the Spider-Verse asks the question if a spider society, if other spider people could ever all coexist at any one time. Sometimes to be the hero of one story, you have to be the villain of another. These characters all take actions that feel antithetical to the Spider-Man philosophy in order to uphold the Spider-Man philosophy, in the same way that Jefferson Davis doesn't want to lose Miles, yet he's often highly unreasonable towards him. Miles has kind of learned that sometimes you have to not be Spider-Man in order to be Spider-Man, in the same way that his father has to sometimes not feel much like a father in order to be a father to him. This movie kind of markets itself as the start of the Spider War, and in war, there are always ugly decisions on any one side, each side having their own justifications. With that, yeah, we've got a great depiction of war here. I've seen some criticism leveled towards this film being incomplete. Some say it's hard to really talk about it because it's not a complete story, given that Beyond the Spider-Verse is on the way. And I guess the fact that, yes, we're getting a cliffhanger ending could have been maybe a little clearer if they'd stuck with the Across the Spider-Verse Part 1 title, but at the same time, I still think there's enough here wrapping up to call this a complete film, even if the central conflict isn't yet resolved and it ends on a cliffhanger. For one, in this film, Gwen and her father make peace. He learns to accept her. This part of herself that's been a weight on her shoulders is finally alleviated. Miles has spent his run up until this point wanting to be one with the Spider Society, but in the end, he rejects them and chooses family. There's a complete chapter here, even if it isn't the whole story. Something I was a little concerned about was that it would be out of character for a bunch of Peter Parkers to dogpile a fellow Spider-Man who just wants to save his dad, but I'll say this, the stakes are tangible enough for me to buy this. It isn't black and white. I'm hoping Miles will prevail in Beyond the Spider-Verse. Gwen has suggested that maybe their understanding of canon events is not enough to allow them to just let people die, so maybe there's leeway here. What Miles' arc represents in Across the Spider-Verse is a character who's leaping out of the pages of the script and telling the writers, no, you're not going to do that to me this time. And that's incredibly meta, but it's done in a way that doesn't feel overly wink-wink, nudge-nudge, or out of left field. In fact, it's absurdly congruent with the previous film, to the point where this surely must have been planned ahead. Because of this, the animated Spider-Man manages to feel like the most real one yet. He's got the most agency. It's a character rejecting the story. Spider-Man faces his greatest foe yet, the writers. All while the writers of this film are delivering us one incredible story. Again, it's all about those blurred lines, to the point where I'm even questioning my disdain for Avi Arad, given that he did have creative input on this project. Heck, the inclusion of Spot in this movie was his idea. Avi Arad good? This film not only tells a great story of its own, it enriches previous stories and rewards fans who have stuck with each incarnation of this franchise, not just with cameos, but with how this story connects to previous ones and pays off. Also, speaking of how this film kind of scrubs out the lines that define being Spider-Man and complicates things, do you think that's maybe why Miles' Spider-Man costume doesn't have any web lines on it this time? I also want to mention that costume has really grown on me. It's clean as hell. That's how you do a redesign. Take note, Insomniac. The animation this time is even more ambitious, even more unique than it was in Into the Spider-Verse. Animation has really elevated this multiverse concept to new heights as each world feels so distinct, and the music goes even harder than before. Daniel Pemberton's score in Into the Spider-Verse was a formidable body of work, but here it's even better, with new cues for Gwen and Miguel that go so hard. You know the score is good when at the start of the film, my friends and I are all looking to each other with big grins saying how good the music is. With all that being said, the movie isn't perfect. There's a scene where Miguel commands all stations to stop Spider-Man, and all the Spider people stop and do the pointing meme, and that joke is so dead at this point. Usually when official media catches onto a meme, that's enough to kill it. But the goodwill for this meme is absolutely tapped out at this point. There was nothing more validating for me than hearing the collective groan of the audience when that scene came on, as opposed to laughter. Also, questionable but not so much negative, this film directly references the events of Spider-Man No Way Home, but how can that film be canon to this one when none of the villains or other Spideys were glitching? Same goes for the MCU at large. Could it be that maybe there are some universes that are just compatible? Oh, that's it, by the way. That's my section for negatives as of right now. I can't really think of anything else. In conclusion, I am absolutely blown away by how good Across the Spider-Verse is. A lot of folks on Twitter have called this film life-changing, and as hyperbolic as that sounds, I'm inclined to agree. The smile this film gave me on the preview night has not left me since watching the film. I hope Marvel Studios are taking notes because, again, what this film gets so right is only elevated by its animation, but isn't reliant on it. The Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy was a trailblazer. It was a cultural touchstone that influenced the superhero subgenre as we know it today. The MCU Spider-Man trilogy is ultimately a product of that. It feeds back into the legacy that the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy started. But I think this Spider-Verse trilogy is going to be the next cultural touchstone for Spidey. Does it live up to the Raimi trilogy? Apples to oranges, I say. One's very intimate, the other is far grander. At the same time, I just think I need more time to decide that. The Raimi trilogy holds such profound importance to me partly because of how well it holds up after all these years later. I have no doubt that the Spider-Verse movies, so far anyway, will do the same, but I don't want to make any grand declarations until they've had their due time. That'd be unfair and risk being disingenuous. That being said, I can safely say that Across the Spider-Verse is easily the best Spider-Man film since the Sam Raimi trilogy, and easily lives up to its predecessor, Into the Spider-Verse. So as of right now, it's definitely in that top tier of Spider-Man movies and comic book movies in general. So what do you guys think of Across the Spider-Verse? What do you guys think of my review? Comment below, discuss, the floor is yours. And as always, if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, be sure to hit subscribe, hit the like button, and if you want your name in the credits of my videos, you can do so for as little as $1 a month and get bonus content over on Patreon, link in the description below. And now a very special shout out for the patrons in the $10 or above tier. Their names are Dear Daddy, Cale Bennett, Jordo, King Clay, here with your PSA. Summer is officially. Go enjoy the nice weather before it gets too hot. Sucky. So scared. I love the Boss Baby movies. I'm the biggest fan. And now for a shout out for the patrons in the $5 or above tier. Their names are Broski, SSS06, Dazzle Fizzle, and Council of Geeks. Thank you so much to these good folks for their generosity and to you good folks for watching, and have a great day.